All right, let's talk Dallas Cowboys. I'm Nick, and this is our daily Cowboys show. Got a lot of interesting news for you guys today involving new concepts. We're talking new Cowboys, new starters as the Cowboys prepare for the Week 3 matchup against the Chicago Bears. But as we always like to do on this channel, get things started with a little stat of the day, right? Get things going. And I've seen some comments over the past few days of people saying, why do we start with the stat of the day? Why don't we just get right into the news? The reason I start with the stat of the day is to get people thinking, to get myself thinking. It's one thing to just pull up news, and as fans, we always sit there, we have an opinion. We hear a story about something, and we're like, oh, that team stinks, that player stinks, that coach stinks, whatever it is. I like to start with some numbers, and, it doesn't really point any direction or the other, just to get us thinking, just to get people like outside the hardcore fanatic, the fan mindset, and just saying, this stinks or this is great, and just look at some data and just think for a second, right? Put the fan aside just for 1 second and get in the right frame of mind before we start digging into the news. So without further ado, let's pull up today's stat of the day, and this is the adjusted EPA per play leaderboard of all quarterbacks so far in the National Football League, qualifying quarterbacks, I should say. And what do you know? Dak Prescott sits number one at the top of the list, right ahead of guys like Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson, the two MVP finalists from last year. Jordan Love having a good start to the season. Number 4, no surprise there. Matt Stafford continues to be underrated. He's a very nice quarterback, off to a good start as well. And you can see the rest of the list there. How about Daniel Jones coming in at number 9 and Darnold coming in at number 6? Wasn't at the top of a lot of people's bingo cards, but those two guys off to hot starts through the first 2 weeks of the season. But I think the big takeaway here is Dak Prescott. You can see he's number 1. If you go to that third column on the right there, that AVG, that average, his score sits at 90. He's got a 6-point gap between him and second place Josh Allen, which is about the same size gap as Josh Allen to Sam Darnold, second to sixth place. So Dak Prescott through 2 games is playing at a level far above any other quarterback. Now, the question is that sustainable? Is this just an aberration? Is this Schottenheimer's offense? Is it CeeDee Lamb, Pickens, Ferguson, the running backs, Turpin, right? Is it the playmakers? Is it all the above? And I think that's the important factor to consider going forward. Dak Prescott's playing good. He's going to have games that aren't so good. And he's had moments over the first 2 weeks that, aren't ideal, but generally he's played outstanding. But part of it is Schottenheimer and Clayton Adams. It's creating an offense, the infrastructure to help out Dak Prescott. Part of it is the receivers, right? They got a superstar in CeeDee Lamb, one of the best number 2s in George Pickens, a quality tight end in Ferguson, running backs running hard right now, and we got a weapon X kind of player in Turpin. You look around and say that's a pretty good group of playmakers, an offensive line that isn't perfect, but you got one of the best guards in the game. You got a first rounder in Tyler Booker that's doing pretty well, especially for a first rounder, seems to be living up to his expectations. Terrence Steele, good against the run. Average to below average against the pass, but still a solid right tackle, all things considered. And Guyton, far from perfect, but coming along and continuing to get better. So we talk about infrastructure. This is what the Cowboys wanted to do, was to build an infrastructure around Prescott, set him up for success. And based on the data so far, it seems they're doing it. All right, with that, let's get into the news here. This is first courtesy of Patrick Walker at Voice of the Star on X. He posted 2 tweets here. The first one, he said he just had a first look of Jadeveon Clowney in a Cowboys uniform. But his second tweet here at the top here, I think is the most important. He says, Brian Schottenheimer, also noticed Jadeveon Clowney coaching Isaiah Landon and other young defensive ends ahead of his first practice/walkthrough. See below. He affects the locker room in a positive way with his experience. It's another big benefit of bringing him in here. Yeah, I think that was a really kind of underrated aspect of adding in a veteran like Clowney, who I think will be a good player. I think he can still defend the run, still can rush the passer. Is he can, suddenly transform this defense overnight? No, but I think you're just trying to get, a couple third down stops, maybe one more 2-minute drill kind of stop. Adding a guy like Clowney in for 10 to 20 snaps a game, I think he'll play a decent amount of snaps, in that 10 to 20 snap range against the Chicago Bears, depending on how things go. But he's also a good addition for the future. He's willing and able to work with the young guys. And again, this is the point I've made numerous times throughout the offseason, through training camp, and now through the regular season up to this point. Every move the Cowboys have been making has been pointing to building towards the future. Every single one of their moves, right? They've been nothing to maximize for success right now. I don't say nothing. They've done very little to maximize for success right now. Eberflus, right? Plays nothing but zone the first 2 weeks, right? Implementing the system he believes will allow them to play championship football in the future, even though they don't have the guys necessarily to do that currently. How about trading for Micah Parsons, of course, getting multiple first-round picks. Kenny Clark included into the trade. Great culture guy, great locker room guy, right? This is a Dallas Cowboys getting Tyler Booker in the game immediately, working through some more lumps else with Gain, right? Every single thing the Cowboys have done, and there's been about 30 other moves you could go through, has been about developing and building towards the future, right? This is what the Cowboys have said when they hired Schottenheimer. They've been trying to retool, get things headed in a long-term trajectory, and this is just another example of that. Jadeveon Clowney helps them for this year, but there's a lot of edge rushers they could have gone out and signed or brought into the fold to maybe help a little bit this year. There's other moves they could have made, but they brought in Clowney and they amplified Clowney, not just to help them try and win games and perform better defensively in 2025, but to work with the young guys to help these young guys be ready in the future. Again, the Cowboys' orientation, they're not punting on 2025, but they correctly have realized that their success path is to be ready by 2026, 2027, 2028, and the majority of their moves, in fact, I would argue pretty much all their moves, are pointing in that direction. All right, this next report here is courtesy of Nick Harris. He posted, Cowboys offensive lineman Brock Hoffman, I'm filling in for Zach Martin in 2024. I always felt like being an undrafted guy, being on the P squad, the practice squad, then making it to the 53. Last year, starting those 7 games really let me know that I can play in this league. I'm just ready to do it again. Of course, this is on the heels of Cooper Beebe missing 6 to 8 weeks, reportedly right now, although a lot of reports say it's going to be closer to 6 weeks. We'll have to wait and see, which means it'll be Hoffman's time to shine as the starting center for the Cowboys during that stretch. He finished the game against the New York Giants, had some clutch plays, did a decent job, and of course, played a lot of football in 2024. Yeah, Hoffman's a very interesting guy. I think he's a fun guy to root for. He's definitely an energy guy. He's a feisty guy. He's, to me, is the perfect backup in terms of almost regardless of position, whether it's a wide receiver, DB, linebacker, defensive line, or offensive line, right? You want the backup to come in and, one, have some baseline level of competency and experience, which obviously Hoffman does, but he's an energy guy. He's a feisty guy. He brings an attitude, and that's one of the things I like about Hoffman, right? He's got a chip on his shoulder. He's willing to scratch and claw. I don't like backups, and this is one of the things I have against, bringing in, first round draft picks that were, have kind of at the end of their career, or former stars at the end of their career as backups, because they're kind of just, in my opinion, this kind of happens sometimes, they're kind of just milking it for a little more playing time, a little more dollars at the end of their career. Now, what's proven me wrong is guys like Solomon Thomas, for example, who's been the opposite of that with the Dallas Cowboys. But I generally just don't like that kind of strategy. I like backups like Hoffman, guys who had to scratch and claw and work their way just to survive on the National Football League. They are begging for an opportunity, and they will do everything in their power to take advantage of it. Now, is Hoffman as good as Beebe? No. I think run blocking, Beebe's a little bit better, and I think pass protection, Beebe is noticeably better. And that's not an indictment on Hoffman. Beebe's a good, solid, young player. But I think Brock Hoffman's going to come in and take every single snap and practice every single second in the meeting room, every single second watching film, and of course, every single snap on these game days, giving everything he has, fighting tooth and nail to give his team the best chance to win, to give him the best chance of surviving and extending his NFL career much farther than a lot of people gave him credit for. And those are the kind of guys I love, when they're given these opportunities to just go out and give it all they have. And this is sort of the mentality that you'd love to have on a football team. Hoffman did a lot of good things last year. I'm excited to see what he does going forward for the Dallas Cowboys as a center over the next 6 to 7 weeks. It's interesting, before the Cowboys selected Tyler Booker in the first round of the draft, there was a debate whether Hoffman should be the long-term starting guard. A lot of people thought he was, passable for the short term, and maybe the Cowboys go, edge rusher in the first round or receiver in the first round. This is before they acquired Pickens, of course. They decided to go guard and have Hoffman be the backup, and right now looks like a pretty good move. All right, next report here. This is courtesy of Todd Archer, beat reporter of the Cowboys for ESPN. He says, Brian Schottenheimer on Dak Prescott through 2 games. I think he's playing how we would expect him to play. Interesting there. We have a high standard for Dak and the way he's supposed to perform. I think there's confidence about him right now, which is great. I love the framing here from Schottenheimer, right? Because Dak Prescott has been playing extremely well through the first 2 games. The eye test shows that. The data shows that. We brought it up in the very first report here once we got going with the show. And I think the way Schottenheimer's framing it is not that this is an aberration, but the expectation, which is important, right? When you pay a quarterback a huge amount of money, which Dak Prescott is being paid, especially in terms of cap hit allocation, and you publicly say you're structuring the team around him and you're going to continue to structure the team around him for success, you demand that high level of performance. Now, obviously, he's been playing maybe even outside of what some people expected him to play, but you expect elite quarterback play, right? You give an offensive coordinator for him. You add a lot of first-round picks on offense. You add a lot of big moves, like the addition of Pickens, all these extensions, things like that, the moves over the years on offense for Dak Prescott. You expect, as a coaching staff, as a leader of the football team, Schottenheimer is here, that level of performance, right? He is your top guy. He's your highest paid guy. You expect a level of performance that aligns with that. And I think that's really important. I think in prior years and prior administrations, there could be a little bit of an excuse for Dak Prescott's performance, right? When he wasn't living up to par. Right here, we see the opposite. We say, listen, this is what we expect. And if you fall short of that, listen, that's not going to be acceptable. And I think Schottenheimer's framing here is really, really important. I've always believed that your highest paid players, your highest paid stars, they have to be productive, aligning with that payment, right? If they aren't, you have problems, right? And this is one of the issues, I think, if you go back to, at times, guys like Micah Parsons, who was insanely productive and insanely good, but one of the reasons people said, well, why is Jerry Jones only going to give him 40 or 41 million and the Packers are going to give 48 million? Because I think if you look at Parsons, especially in those big moments, not hyper productive, not hyper elite, still a phenomenal player, still all pro. I'm not taking anything away from Parsons, still an outstanding player. He may turn it around in terms of being a clutch player and being productive in those big games for Green Bay going forward. He certainly could. He certainly might. But I think Jerry Jones and the front office said, listen, man, you're a great player. You're an all-pro. You're a superstar. But our expectations of you were to continue that level of production in those big games, in those big moments, and you haven't done it yet. That's why, I don't think he voiced this externally, but probably in his own head said, that's why we're not giving you $50 million a year. Dak Prescott, they gave him that money. Now they want to see the production. They want to see the efficiency. And through 2 games, they're getting it. But that's not an aberration. That's got to be the standard. Again, Schottenheimer has good framing here. All right, moving on to Tommy Yarish's report. He said, through 2 games, Cowboys wide receiver George Pickens is expeding his route tree and getting used to playing alongside Dak Prescott and his new teammates. Quote, I don't want to say you can't stop us, but we're definitely going to come out and dominate. Yeah, Pickens obviously had an impact in week 1 with 3 catches, but pass interference call was pretty active. I think in week 2 he took a whole another bigger role, of course, still drawing pass interferences. That seems to be a huge part of his role in the offense, but big clutch catches down the stretch. Of course, a touchdown to take the lead towards the end of the 4th quarter, and then that big reception to put them in field goal range in the final 2 minutes of overtime. Continues to get more and more involved in the offense. I think this just goes back to my point that I've been making numerous times, that September football, a lot of times, is just figuring out who you are and what you have as a team and how you can play your guys in the context of your scheme. Because you go through the offseason, you go through training camp, and you have ideas of who on your team is good and how you can use them, but you really don't know until you get into games and you see the counter to that, right? Because you have this great plan, but like that famous quote that everyone repeats 5 million times, everyone has a plan until you get hit in the mouth, right? And when you stood up week 1 and week 2, you have this great plan offensively, defensively, but the other guy has a vote, right? And they throw it back at you with the counter to your plan, and now you got to figure out the counter to that strategy and figure out where your players sit and how things settle out, right? And it takes time to figure that out. In week 1 to week 2, we saw him jump from Pickens, and I think as we work through September and deeper into October, we'll continue to see him also have an active role. And if Pickens can continue to have the same kind of impact going forward as we saw in week 1 and week 2, right? Just the way he affects the game, obviously CeeDee Lamb being a superstar, this offense is going to be really, really hard to stop because they're physical. They can run the football. Ferguson, while not perfect, has had some drops the first couple weeks, has played a lot more closely to the 2023 version of Ferguson as opposed to the 2024 version of Ferguson. Turpin being used as a weapon X, of course, has had a big role in the offense as well. No really massive plays from Turpin yet either, just creating some matchup nightmares and creating some productive plays, right? Just teams are so scared of his big play ability that they basically give him 7-8 yards at times, which basically is, it's not a free first down, but it's pretty close in a lot of instances. I think of this offense as it continues to get better and figure out where things sit, they're just going to get better, just more efficient, right? Now, obviously, you score 37 points and 40 points, in week 2. You score 20 points, but left a lot of meat on the bone in week 1. You can say, listen, offense is doing good. I think it can continue to be better, which is important because, as we've seen through 2 weeks, it is clearly the strength of this football team. All right, next report here is from Joseph Hoyt. Talking about the Cowboys, they did not have a practice on Wednesday, not a padded practice, more of a walkthrough. And when asked about it, Brian Schottenheimer said on having a walkthrough, anytime you play 70 minutes of kick-ass football, referring to the 60 minutes of regulation and 10 full minutes of overtime last Sunday, back and forth and running like that, we have a responsibility to kind of trust numbers. I told our guys from day one, if they go out for us, we'll take care of them. Right, I don't necessarily agree or disagree with not having a full padded practice and having a walkthrough. I do love if he says this, and I have no reason to doubt this. If he said in the past, listen, guys, if you go all out and give everything you have, for this team, we'll make sure not to kill you in practice. We'll take care of you. We'll work with you here. And I love that from a coach. If he said that, and obviously there's no reason to doubt that he said that. But if he says that now he's backing up, that's really important, right? Players look for authenticity. Players look for coaches being honest, right? One of the things, and look, I was a former collegiate player, FCS football, so small time. So, there's no, and I was a backup anyway, so there's no like highlight film out there of me dominating or anything like that. So take that with a big old grain of salt. But one of the things that me and my teammates would always find frustrating with coaches was when they would tell us one thing and then do the opposite. They would sit there and say, listen, if you guys put forth a great effort, we'll give you Sundays off or something like that. Because Sunday was like a lift day and a film day and a walkthrough day and a conditioning day. And we had games on Saturdays, right? That was kind of a tough deal. And what would happen, sometimes we'd have like a road game that was a long trip, and it would be just a back and forth crazy game that we would fall short. And then Sundays would be a regular Sunday. And it would just be, everyone's exhausted and mentally and physically drained. You got to go through that process, and it starts the week off on a bad foot. And we'd all be like, hey, I thought we put forth a good effort. I thought we, really committed and really gave everything we had here. We're exhausted physically and mentally, and now you're not giving us any time to recover. And they'd be like, I don't care, right? And that's just, it became tough. It became frustrating at times. Schottenheimer, again, professional mindset. Players coach, but not to the extreme McCarthy or Garrett was, right? He'll call them out on the crap, right? We mentioned that numerous times, but he's also not just going to bury them into the dirt for no reason, right? This is there's a fine line, right? You can look at Bill Parcells as a disciplinarian and obviously an all-time good one, but he wasn't an idiot about it like Matt Patricia was when he was a head coach with the Detroit Lions doing a lot of dumb stuff. So you can be a disciplinarian, you can be tough, but you can't be stupid. You can be a player's coach, but you can't coddle the players, right? There's a fine line right there, and there's a little bit of moving around the spectrum. I think you look at Schottenheimer, I don't think he's like the disciplinarian of a Parcells or like a Jimmy Johnson or something like that, but he certainly doesn't coddle the players, but he also listens to it and understands the situation and tries to be authentic and honest with them. So I think Schottenheimer has done a good job, a fantastic job, if I'm being honest, being consistent and playing to who he is. And I think the players respond to that, and I think that's a good sign for them going forward. Again, is it a big deal in terms of generating more wins and things like that and playing better? Probably not, but in terms of long-term getting buy-in to what him and his coaching staff are trying to do, it certainly helps with that. All right, this next report right here is courtesy of Adam Hoge, who is a Bears reporter. Obviously, Cowboys' Week 3 opponent. Ben Johnson announced about Matt Eberflus knowing Caleb Williams' tendency. Eberflus obviously coached Caleb Williams as the Bears head coach last season. Johnson said, yeah, well, we've got guys in the building that know how his mind works. So we have some information on just schematically how we like to approach my offense in general and his feelings on Caleb. I feel like we know what he knows, and we'll be just fine there. So one of the most, I only bring this up just to talk about, one of the most overplayed storylines is this sort of matchup here where a former coach who goes coaching against his team that he coached with last year, does he know any extra insights? Does he know any extra information? And the answer is yes, but a whole heck of a lot less than the media would have you believe, right? It's one of these things where, oh, is this a big advantage one way or the other? I think it's a tiny advantage. If anything, it could be like, hey, listen, when I was coaching Caleb Williams last year, he for whatever reason, had a little bit of an ankle problem, so he never threw to his left very much because he couldn't drive off the football. That looks healed this year, right? Little nitnoid stuff like that, right? That's really what it is, because they'll be looking at tape, or they'll be looking at the Bears tape as they're preparing, and they'll probably bring in Eberflus and say, hey man, what are you seeing this year versus what you saw last year? And you can say like, yeah man, their defensive tackle, he looks healthy, he's gotten a lot better, or like, yeah, that corner that was on our team last year, he's taken a step back this year. I don't know really what's going on, but he's still a potentially good player, right? It's very high level stuff. It's not like very, very like micro in the weeds details, little nuances, little tricks. It's overplayed by the media. There's little tiny things that can influence a little bit here, a little bit there, but it's really no different than a high level scouting report on a little nitnoid stuff. I don't think it has really effect on the game, to be honest, when it's all said and done. It's just a nice storyline to get people talking. And it is sort of interesting, right? You have Eberflus, after being fired mid-season with the Bears last season, has a chance to return after a somewhat disappointing start as a defensive coordinator for Dallas so far in 2025. We'll have to see how him and his unit responds returning to Chicago this Sunday. All right, and finally, we got some really, I think this is awesome news here, guys. This is courtesy of Garrett Podell, or Podell, however you pronounce it. I apologize if I get that wrong, Garrett. He's got an image of DeMarvion Overshown here, again, doing some rehab stuff. He's not, obviously practicing or anything like that yet, But he posts no leg sleeve on Dallas Cowboys linebacker Jadeveon Overshown for the first time that I can remember since a knee injury last Thanksgiving. Podell's a little off here, of course. The knee injury happened after Thanksgiving against the Cincinnati Bengals. I'll forgive him for that. It's understandable. Overshown told at Joe Joy Hoyt he feels like he can maybe beat his initial timeline of returning this Thanksgiving against the Kansas City Chiefs. I mean, you talk about a guy who's just attacking the rehab, and he's done it before. Obviously, he's dealt with injuries. If he can return before Kansas City, I mean, you talk about, first of all, getting Overshown back in any capacity. We talk about Hoffman being an energy guy, a feisty, tough guy to get people going. Jadeveon Overshown is that like times a million. He's a guy that when he's on the football field, and we saw that last year, the defense plays faster. They play with a higher renewed sense of energy, right? I mean, he's just a big play machine. Prior to his injury, he had become one of the best big play defenders, one of the best playmaking linebackers in all National Football League. That pick six on Thanksgiving was one of the defensive plays of the year. He had, at the time, it was the fastest sack in terms of snap sacking the quarterback with that play on Brock Purdy against San Francisco in the fourth quarter. I mean, he made a number of big plays. A fourth down stop against the Cincinnati Bengals comes to mind, right? There's a lot of plays that he made just across the entire season, just big play after big play after big play. Not perfect, but just an energy guy. He, sacks against Philadelphia come to mind too. Just guy flying all over the field, making just an incredible change to this defense. It's one of those things, having him into the fold, returning to this team, even if it's a limited capacity, even when he gets brought up to speed, we're talking if it's just 10, 15 snaps a game, if he's healthy, if he's ready to go, it's going to be a huge boost to this defense because he is one of the few guys on the Dallas Cowboys right now, outside of really Osa Odighizuwa and Kenny Clark. They're two defensive tackles. And when we talk about the Cowboys defensive tackles being the strength of the defense, but that's where we are right now, guys, which I think is certainly a change and a welcome change of what we've seen in years past. But outside of those two guys, who's a playmaker on this Cowboys defense? Right, you look at Diggs, he's coming back into the fold. I mean, maybe he could be Bland, right? We'll see when he comes back from injury, right? Outside of that, right, who's making plays? Who's a guy that's, going to be blitz off the edge and create a huge sack or blow up a play for a 4-yard loss just out of strength of pure speed and playmaking ability? That's one of the things the Cowboys have missed over the first 2 weeks of the season is that playmaker. And I know a lot of people look at, the scheme issues, the coverage issues, and some communication problems. And I get that. And it's all very fair. Lack of pass rush from defensive ends at times. And that's all very fair. But sometimes on defense, you need guys that can just blow a series up, that can blow a drive up, right? Parsons certainly was that. DeMarcus Lawrence, when he was healthy, certainly was that. Right now, they're missing that. You go across the board, they just don't have a guy that can do that. Jadeveon Overshown certainly is that guy. If he can return, even if it's a limited capacity before Thanksgiving, that's a huge get for the Cowboys defense. All right, let's get into the comments from yesterday. Let's get started with the member comments. As always, I appreciate our members. They support what we do on this channel. And if you want to support us, becoming a member is a great way to do it. There's a link in the description box below that will take you right to it. We will always address member comments first, and we will always address all the member comments before we get to the other comments. I'll try and get to as many other comments as I can as time permits, but no guarantees there, of course. So if you want to make sure you get your voice heard, become a member. All right, so this first comment here is from David Dobbins, 5887. He says, I got 47 million reasons why I don't think we miss Micah as much as we think we do. With Micah, you don't have Clark, which is very true. Looking back at the last two games, now remove Clark and add Micah. I doubt any sacks and both teams running all over us. Again, no 47 million to sign in-house talent, much less a star if available. Clowney and Clark, and 40 million, 20 next year Clark, and 2 additional number ones versus Micah. Yeah, it's a very good point, right? And it's one of those things that has changed with the Cowboys. You look at the pass defense specifically against New York, but generally defensively overall. If you look at the Cowboys last season during this time frame, right? They had played the Cleveland Browns, which are obviously a bad football team, and the New Orleans Saints, which were starting the year strong, but injuries derailed their season. And they surrendered over the course of those first 2 games, 61 points. That's with Parsons. That's with a healthy DeMarcus Lawrence, right? That was, with Trayvon Diggs being full speed. Deron Bland was hurt at the time, so there's a little apples to apples there, but they were much healthier, much more talented, at least on paper up front. Osa Odighizuwa had issues at defensive tackle, but they essentially performed at the same level this year, surrendering at this point, you guessed it, guys, 61 points, exact same points allowed. The difference is they don't have Parsons, right? They also had Overshown those first 2 weeks too, by the way. Keep that in mind. But so far this season, no Overshown, right? No Bland 2, limited Diggs, no Micah Parsons, no DeMarcus Lawrence. They have Kenny Clark into the fold, but you could look at this overall and say through 2 games, they're playing just as good. I would argue some ways maybe a little bit better, some ways maybe a little bit worse than they were last year at the same time, with a lot more cap space, a lot more dollars, and the 2 additional draft picks. So it's one of these situations where, again, from 2023, when they were healthy at the beginning of 2024, excuse me, when they were healthy at the beginning of the season, to 2020, relatively healthy at the beginning of the season, minus Deron Bland, to right now through 2 games, 2025, where they've, in my opinion, a lot more beat up, a lot less depth, and they don't have Parsons, and they don't have DeMarcus Lawrence. And despite that, they're essentially playing at the same level with a much brighter future in terms of the cap space and the draft picks. That's good roster management, right? That's one of those situations where, listen, as a team, you're basically gotten much more assets to work with, and your baseline level of performance hasn't changed, right? They gave up 44 to New Orleans last year with Micah Parsons and DeMarcus Lawrence and a lot of big name guys, right? You move off Micah Parsons. Listen, you got some problems rushing the passer. Maybe Clowney can fix it. Maybe they won't. But you add Kenny Clark. You're doing a much better job stopping the run. I mean, much better job stopping the run, especially inside. I think we've all seen that. Philadelphia, if you go back to the Eagles game, when they were running in between the tackles, the Cowboys were physically better. It was only on the edges and with Jalen Hurts scrambling that really inflated the Eagles' rushing attack. And obviously the Cowboys, with the exception of one run that was kind of on that zone read kind of concept to Cam Scatterbo with Jackson Dart in the game, the Cowboys really physically handled the Giants running the football, certainly inside the tackles. I think this is a physical group up front. They need more edge rush help. Clowney can hopefully help in the short term, but they got the cap space, they got the draft picks to really set that up. One name to keep an eye on, it's very, very early, but it's very interesting, is Trey Hendrickson, the defensive end for the Cincinnati Bengals. The Bengals obviously lost quarterback Joe Burrow. There was a contract dispute between Hendrickson and the Cincinnati front office, very similar to Micah Parsons. He wanted to trade. He didn't get it. He decided to come back and play on a short-term concept, at least on paper, for Cincinnati this season. If things don't go right for the Bengals and the Bengals, aren't able to survive without Joe Burrow and they've kind of see themselves falling out of postseason contention, I'm very interested to see what happens with Hendrickson. Do the Cowboys trade for Hendrickson? It would probably take something like a 2nd and a 4th round pick, but can you imagine a world where you trade Micah Parsons, a 2nd round pick, and a 4th round pick, and you get 2 number ones, Kenny Clark and Trey Hendrickson? That's a massive win. That's a clear win for Dallas. I mean, that's not even close, right? 2 great veterans and 2 first-round picks. The money would probably net about the same. We'll have to see if that did happen. We'd have to look at the numbers then, of course. But that's the opportunity the Cowboys have in front of them. Again, they maintain that same overall baseline level of performance with a lot of optionality for the future. That's a good position to be in. All right, this next comment here is from Robert Bass, 3667. He says, Nick, I don't hear much negative from the press concerning Hoffman replacing the injured Cooper Beebe. Is that because Hoffman is a good replacement? I think yes. Or, if I may ask, what is your personal view of Hoffman playing center for the next 6 to 8 weeks? Is it a no biggie, or do we have an issue there? Thank you in advance for your answer. Well, I talked about that a little bit already, but I think Hoffman's a good, feisty, tough, physical guy. He's a great backup. He's the kind of backup you want on your team. Is he as good as Beebe? No, he's not as good as Cooper Beebe, but he's got experience. He's a physical guy. I think the quarterback likes him. Prescott likes him. The offensive line room likes him. Schottenheimer likes him in terms of style of play. Little worried about the penalties. Sometimes Cooper Beebe doesn't get a lot of penalties. Hoffman's a little bit more likely to get them just by the style he plays. I think that's a potential concern. We'll have to see how he does. But he played well down the stretch, coming up in those clutch moments against New York. Again, you have injuries. Injuries are a fact of life, but this is one position actually so far where the backup in Hoffman is a really solid replacement, right? There's honestly, when all things considered, in terms of how cheap Hoffman is contractually and his experience and his performance, I think the Cowboys' backup center is one of the better backups, and we're going to see it over the next 6 to 8 weeks. Not nearly as good as Beebe, of course. Beebe's a really good young player, but I think Hoffman, he's going to do fine at the center position, especially if he can avoid any dumb penalties, which he had a few of them last year. I think he'll correct some of that, just the way he plays stylistically, but I think it's a really nice backup. That's one of the reasons why you don't see the media talking about it so much. It's one of those things where there's not a lot of question marks, right? Hoffman played, he's experienced, he's young, he's cheap, and he's a feisty interior that fits what the Cowboys want to be up front in terms of a physical group. So the media's not talking about it too much because he's a pretty good backup who there's not going to be a whole lot of shift or change strategically in terms of what the Cowboys want to do offensively. All right, let's get into some regular comments here. All right, this first one here is from Dino Leish, 9397. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. He said, I love Bland as a cornerback, but he does not change an opponent's game plan. Changing out Donovan Wilson will help with this zone coverage. Quarterbacks were playing thirds to roll up into a safety stack coverage. Talking about Donovan Wilson, kept looking in the backfield at the quarterback while the wide receivers ran past him. Look at the film. It's not rocket science to stomp these deep bombs, but the DC should know his personnel. Everyone, including fans, know Dono is bad in coverage and should stay in the box or be on the sideline. He should not be a defensive captain. Well, I think there's a couple things to understand here. When it comes to captains, that's a little bit different dynamic, right? It could be he could be a weight room guy, it could be a great practice guy, it could be a great leader, it could be a great mentor to the young guys, right? What makes a captain is always sort of much more than what you see on Sunday afternoon. So I do think that's a caveat, right, to throw out there, of course. Now, when it comes to his performance, he was obviously quite terrible, but that's not who he wants to be. That stylistically, he's not a deep middle third, safety. He's not, a center fielder. That's not who he is. And I honestly think and I've talked about this a few times already, but I think Eberflus was so hyper-focused on the young Reddy Stewart and the backup corners that he rolled a lot of coverage to help out Stewart in certain situations early in the game, and it created opportunities for the Giants to take advantage of it, and it just kind of snowballed from there. And I think Donovan Wilson being a center fielder isn't great, and I think they're going to have to come up with some kind of adjustment. But to be fair against Donovan Wilson, right, these communication issues, while a lot of it is his fault, I think it's one of those things that this is his first time in a long time that he's actually had to do that kind of thing, and he had to do it in a big moment. And look, it wasn't a good performance, but one of the things that happens with players is you got to throw them out there and see how they do, and that's what September football is all about. I mean, a lot of us could have said, yeah, we kind of expect Donovan Wilson to play, not great, but there's a chance that Eberflus was betting that, listen, we can maybe survive with Wilson in these situations, and they learned that they can't, right? So that's valuable information there too, right? Because it's one thing to learn what players are good at. You also learn what players really can't do. And going forward, they figured out Donovan Wilson, at least with the structure of the defense. Maybe they change it going forward. Maybe they, talk about the communication issues. Maybe they tell the corners the game plan now is, listen, here's how you treat these situations. Don't expect safety help, right? You're going to ride them upfield the entire way before you come off of them. If Donovan Wilson, we have this call, and let's say in these calls, Donovan Wilson is the center fielder, this is how you have to play it, right? That's what the cornerbacks maybe taunt going forward, right? That's what has to happen. September football, that's what's about. Maybe Donovan Wilson doesn't play those coverages anymore, right? You got to figure these things out, guys. It's not something you can know going into the season with full certainty. That's one of the reasons why you see some teams really do well in September and some teams do really poor, but they end up doing fine over the course of a long season. Remember, the Eagles were 2-2 last year through 4 games. A lot of people were looking at that team and saying, how good are they really? I mean, they were one and done in 2023 in the postseason after a collapse of a finish. 2-2 start. Is Nick Sirianni lost his team? And of course, they went on to win the Super Bowl and do it in decisive fashion. September football is all about figuring out what you have and what you don't. And look, as bad as it was for Dallas in week 2 with Donovan Wilson in coverage in those situations, they found out what they have and what they don't, I think, going forward, or at least what they need to correct. And there is some value in that, but there is certainly reason for concern because that was pretty bad. So I would say as a fan perspective, you're like, I'm not very positive about this coverage, at least until the reinforcements return in the secondary, maybe until more pass rush help arrives as too. Jadeveon Clowney should help with that. But at least you can make the argument, listen, it's September football. You got to figure these things out. All right, next comment here. This is from Plague Doctor, who's a regular commenter, says, nice explanation. I actually fully agree with your points on my comment. You do need a system in place, and I could see that's what Shotty is doing. I'm actually very pleased with him, far more than I was with Garrett or McCarthy, and even I like McCarthy, unlike a lot of people. I'm just very leery about our defense. You need some resources at safety to run this defense. Dallas may be turning a new leaf on that. Yeah, it's one of those things, and this is what I talked about yesterday, is that because there's a big complaint of with Eberflus, it's like, well, why are you running that scheme when the players or personnel doesn't fit that scheme right now? And I talked about, listen, it's about establishing the system. It's about establishing the coverage packages and how you want to be defensively, and then get the players, and then determine what players fit that, what players can function in that, and then go out and get those players, right? It's a multi-year process. Do you just play to maximize your wins to get to 9 or 10 wins, this season, and then that's it? Maybe win a playoff game and that's the best you ever do, maybe ever. Or do you implement a system that can win you a championship, evaluate players in that system, and then fill the gaps as needed? It seems like the Cowboys are going with the second option, which I think is the actual long-term championship building approach. I think that's the right approach, right? You can't straight up play man and expect to win a championship across the board. You got to be versatile. Fangio proved this, right? A lot of, Belichick and his defense has famously proved this so many times. You got to be able to mix up coverages. You got to go zone. You got to go man. You got to play a lot of zone. You got to rely on a front four to get pressure. You got to be able to stomp the run. All those different concepts, you've got to do that Dallas couldn't do over the past really 5, 6, 7 years. Right now, Eberflus is implementing a scheme that he thinks has a chance to eventually be the scheme to help him win a championship. Look, we'll have to see if it does or not, but I think implementing the strategy and then finding the players to fit that later is the right approach, right? I think you got to get that system in place. Now, to be leery of the defense, you should be, right? This was a bad defense last year that lost its best player, Micah Parsons. They got a good player in Kenny Clark, but they're devastated by injuries early on already. Their second best player, DeMarvin Overshown, is going to miss the vast majority of the season. They've already missed Bland for a few games. Diggs is slowly coming back into the fold. Hopefully he returns to form a little bit better week 3. I mean, this is going to be, like I've mentioned this 1,000 times, September was always going to be rough, right? It was always going to be new scheme, new players, right? A lot of injuries. The cavalry is going to return. The cavalry is going to arrive October and November. It may be too late for the Cowboys to make a serious run this season, but again, implementing the system and allowing the strength of your team be the offense for right now isn't a horrific approach, right? I think the most important thing to focus on, I know this Cowboys team, people look at the defense and they say, yikes. But Schottenheimer, Clayton Adams, the talent, the stars, the capital this offseason. Remember, first round pick, Booker, right? Extension for Ferguson, extension for Turpin, right? Emphasizing CeeDee Lamb in the offense more. Schottenheimer retained as the offensive coach, bringing in Clayton Adams, power running game, right? A lot of the big moves were focused for the short term, for things that would affect the Cowboys. Now we're focused on the offense, the long-term plays, right? Trading Micah Parsons, short-term hit on Dallas defensively, long-term gain, right? The Cowboys focus more on the short term for the offense, longer term for the defense, which means obviously, you're going to be better on offensively early. You're going to be better offensively early. Hopefully, the defense will then catch up in the future. So you should be leery of this defense. This is not going to be a good defense. Maybe they figure things out and become better as the season progresses. But the strength of the team is going to be on the offense, undeniably so. I think the defense right now is just figuring out what you got. And look, in some ways, they learned a lot of that week 2. They found a way to get a win. They found a way to scratch and claw. And I've said this before. It's going to be that kind of season, a scratch and claw. Get your heart medicine out if you need to take it kind of season for Dallas. I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. All right, let's work here. A lot of people very negative, of course, on Donovan Wilson. I got a comment here. This is from Craig Beal X71. He said, when both Deron Bland and Trayvon Diggs are at 100% and healthy, we're a problem. And I mean that in a good way. Yeah, it's one of those things where it's been just snake bitten that you can't get Diggs and Bland 100% healthy, right? They've had issues with that a couple seasons now. If that could actually happen, it's a completely different defense, right? And because right now, like I said before, the Cowboys were starting Reddy Stewart or playing him a lot last season or last week, and he's a guy that love Reddy Stewart to death. He's a practice squad, basically elevation, borderline 53-man guy, like fringe guy that the Cowboys acquired because they were so beat up at the secondary after training camp. So he's basically a practice squad elevation that's playing a whole bunch of snaps, right? That's not ideal. That's not how this team was designed. If you look at the team actually functioning as designed, it's Diggs, it's Bland, right? It's Revel long term, and it's Elam as a depth guy, with Butler as a depth guy, with Carson's as a depth guy, Kalen Carson, right? You look at Reddy Stewart and some of these other guys, they have no factor into it. Kyrie Elam is a depth guy when everyone's healthy and playing full speed, right? Instead, he's playing a whole bunch of snaps, a lot of times one-on-one against good receivers. So, again, understand that what we're seeing from the Cowboys from a roster perspective on defense, that's not how they were designed. Now, of course, injuries play a role. It's a fact of life. You got to find a way to adjust. But everyone looks at the secondary and says, what is wrong with the secondary? It's like, listen, you've got Carson hurt, Butler hurt, you've got Bland hurt, you've got Diggs coming back from injury, right? You got 3 guys missing time because of injury, and you've got a 4th guy that's just coming back from injury, and it's a new scheme, and you've got a pass rush where you punt it a little bit to get that help in the future to build a deeper team. So every single lens you want to look at this, right? This is not set up for success early on for the Cowboys secondary. We should not be surprised by what we're seeing. It's still disappointing, and you got to play better. You can't have the coverage bust or anything like that. But don't be surprised by the results you're getting on the field, right? This was the Cowboys' weakness coming into the season, right? And it's going to be addressed when people get healthy, and it should be addressed in 2026. But the reality is, it's just where they sit at this position today. All right. Roland B 1296 commented, adjustments need to be made in game to address these issues on defense. Here's the one point I will make on that, and this is where it becomes a little harder. So people talk about you need to make in-game adjustments. The reality is, if you're starting guys in a new scheme and new starters, like Reddy Stewart, for example, Kyrie Elam, first year with Dallas, first year in the scheme, right? Didn't get a whole lot of, by the end of his career at Buffalo, was really kind of relegated a little bit. you don't have a lot of different coverages and packages to call, right? People think people think it's like a Madden video game where it's like, well, we can just straight up play man and that's it. Well, it's more than just lining up and playing man, right? You got to have practice communicating, hey, when the receivers are in bunch, and my guy goes inside, your guy goes outside. Do we hand that off or do we stay on our guys? Like, how do we handle that? Otherwise, you get coverage busts in your own right. And if you're not used to playing man coverage, you get a million pass interference penalties and you get beat a lot like the Giants did. And the Giants are a much more man-heavy team. So again, just the idea that, well, you need to change the coverage and change the schemes. If you haven't game planned for that, if you haven't had practice with that, especially with the injuries and the new guys, switching to a new scheme is even worse because you're going to just have just a litany of issues and you're not going to get better at your core concepts. I would rather the Cowboys, and again, I know it was ugly, I know it was just god-awful terrible at times, to put it bluntly. I'd rather them go through the lumps and try and practice, and I say practice in air quotes, of course, go through the schemes that they think will be their long-term success engines with these hurt guys and figure out how to react and survive in those situations and learn how to play what they think will be a championship scheme than just try, what can we throw out there just to work to get through a game? Look, could the Cowboys have basically all-out blitzed every other play and left their corners on an island and probably done better defensively? Probably, right? They probably could have gotten one more stop. Right, and they would have won the game. They won the game anyway, but they may have won the game earlier, right? Because they gave so many big plays on offense, it really didn't matter. Playing their coverages, they gave the same amount of big plays. If they would have just blitzed everybody, and maybe they would have gotten home once or twice and gotten the stop, right? That's fair. That's a fair point to make, at least in terms of how they play in regulation. But would that have helped them out long term, right? You can't go 7-man blitzes. You can go all-out blitzes long term in order to win the National Football League. You can't do that, right? You've got to set the things in place to win for the long term. Now, we don't know if Eberflus's scheme, the one caveat there is what they need to do to win long term, right? That's what they think it is, that's what they hope it is, but we don't know for certain. But you got to give it a fair opportunity. You got to give it a chance. And I think if you look at Zimmer last year, he's a great example of this. I think Zimmer at times called a good defense, certainly the second half of the season. But a lot of what he was doing was not something that was sustainable, but that could help the Cowboys defense really do a lot of great things. He would do a lot of blitzes, a lot of aggressive stuff, and it helped the Cowboys win some games down the stretch. But did it help them at all in terms of setting up a process and setting up the systems to put this defense to improve year over year? It didn't, right? You got to go with a process and a system. There's no guarantee of success if you do that, right? Eberflus's long-term strategy could be absolute hot garbage for the defense, or it could be absolutely genius, or it could be somewhere in between. But you got to at least give it the time to develop, give it the time to evaluate what players fit, and then bring in players to fit that scheme. It takes time. There's going to be a lot of ugly when you do it, but that's the approach you've got to take. All right. It's all the time I have for today. Again, we're going to see the Cowboys getting closer to that week 3 matchup against Chicago. Very interesting game with the Bears. Really excited to see how Dak Prescott on this running game continues to improve. Look, I want to see what the secondary does. I want to see if they can learn from the mistakes and play better against a Bears offense that, they haven't been terrible. They've actually been pretty good at generating big plays over the first 2 weeks of the season against some pretty solid competition. Good Minnesota Vikings defense and a very good Detroit Lions team. So it's an interesting matchup week 3. We'll have to see how everything goes. Going to follow with more news as we get closer to kickoff. But until tomorrow, I'm Nick, and this is Saturday Morning Inspection.